Hi. So during the next weeks, we are going to be looking at the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And this is an older book by Dr. Stephen Covey. It looks at how we become more effective as individuals. I think it's a great companion with the material that we start with in strategic management as we're looking at the mission and vision of organizations and answering these big questions for our companies. It's also great to take some time to look at these big questions for ourselves. And that is what we will do now. So we'll start with looking at the personality versus character ethics, which Covey speaks about early in the book. Basically, 2 main schools of thought emerged shortly after World War II and focused on these superficial type of things, the temporary fixes. Our personality ethics comes out of this idea of filling ourselves with social image techniques, fixes to symptoms, but not the problems, positive mental attitudes. And that's basically what Dr. Covey calls the personality ethic, and success becomes more of a function of our personality and our public image of attitude and behavior, skills, and techniques. Personality ethic takes 2 different paths. One is human, one is public relations, and the other is positive mental attitude. This philosophy is expressed in inspiring and sometimes valid ideas, such as the attitude determines your altitude, whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe it can achieve. Some parts of personality ethics are manipulative and even deceptive, though. It encourages people to use techniques to get other people to like them, or to fake interest in the hobbies of others to get out of them what they wanted. Character is sometimes acknowledged, but tends to be compartmentalized rather than a foundational essence of a person. In the first 150 years, however, this literature is in stark contrast and is focused on what could be called character ethic, which is the foundation for success. Things like integrity, humility, fidelity, temperance, courage, justice, patience, and the golden rule. The character ethics taught that there are basic principles of effective living, and that people can only experience true success and enduring happiness as they learn to integrate these principles into their basic character. When we look at these 2 different ethics, we look at and become aware of what we would call primary and secondary greatness. It's not to suggest that personality ethic isn't there, or there aren't parts of it that are really beneficial. Personality growth, communication, skill, training, education, all are influential strategies that are important. They're beneficial. In fact, sometimes they're even essential. But these are secondary, not primary traits. If I tried to use human influence, strategies and tactics, how to get to other people to do what I want, to work better, to be more motivated, to be like me or each other, or like each other, while my character is fundamentally flawed, marked by duplicity and insincerity, then in the long run, I cannot be successful. My duplicity will breed distrust in everything I do. Even using so-called good human relations techniques will be perceived as manipulative. It simply makes no difference how good the rhetoric is, or even how good the intentions are. If there's little or no trust, there is no foundation to permanent success. To focus on technique is like cramming your way through school. You sometimes get by, perhaps even get good grades, but you don't pay the price day in and day out. If you don't pay the price day in and day out, you never achieve true mastery of the subjects you study or develop an educated mind. Consider how ridiculous it would be to try and cram on a farm to forget to play in the spring, playing all summer, and then cramming in the fall to bring in the harvest. The farm is a natural system. The price must be paid. The process is followed. You reap what you sow. There's no shortcut. You can't cram through. You have to follow the processes. The principles is also true ultimately in our human relationships. They too are natural systems based on the law of the harvest. In the short run, in an artificial social system such as school, you may be able to get by if you learn how to manipulate the man-made rules or to quote, unquote, play the game. In most one-shot or short-lived human interactions. You can use the personality ethic to get by. You can make favorable impressions through charm and skill and pretending to be interested. The secondary traits alone have no permanent worth in long-term relationships. Eventually, if there isn't deep integrity and fundamental character strength, the challenges of life will cause true motives to surface in human relationships. Failure will replace short-term success. What we are communicates far more eloquently than anything we say or do. There are people we trust, absolutely, because we know their character. In the words of William George Jordan, into the hands of every individual is given a marvelous power for good or evil, the silent, unconscious, unseen influence of his life. This is simply the constant radiation of what man really is, what he pretends to be. The 7 habits embody many of the fundamental principles of human effectiveness. They represent the internalization of correct principles, which, upon enduring happiness and success, are based. But before we can really understand the habits, we have to understand our own paradigms and how these paradigms, and how to make a paradigm shift. Let's suppose you wanted to arrive at a specific location in central Chicago. A street map of the city would be of great help to you in reaching your destination. But suppose you were given the wrong map through a printing error. The map labeled Chicago was actually a map of Detroit. Can you imagine the frustration, the ineffectiveness of trying to reach your destination? You might work on your behavior. You could try harder. You could be more diligent, double your speed, but your efforts would only succeed in getting you to the wrong place faster. You could work on your attitude. You could think more positively, but you still would not get to the right place. But perhaps you wouldn't care. Your attitude would be so positive you'd be happy wherever you are. The point is, you would still be lost. The fundamental problem has nothing to do with your behavior or your attitude. It has everything to do with having the wrong map. And if you have the right map of Chicago, then diligence becomes important. And when you encounter frustrating obstacles along the way, then attitude can make a real difference. But the first and most important requirement is the accuracy of the map. Each of us have many maps in our head, which can be divided into 2 main categories: maps of the way things are, or the reality, and maps of the way things should be, or our values. We interpret everything we experience through these mental maps. We seldom question their accuracy. We're usually even unaware that we have them. We simply assume that the way we see things is the way we really are, or the way they should be, and our attitudes and behaviors grow out of these assumptions and the way we see things. It's a source of the way we think and the way we act. So if we try to change our attitudes and behaviors, it does very little good in the long run. And because we will fail to examine our basic paradigms from which those attitudes and behaviors flow. So when we look at paradigms, what are we really talking about? Well, a paradigm is a mental representation. A paradigm means model pattern or a set of ideas that describes some aspects of the world. Paradigms usually explain cause and effect relationships that scientists use to make predictions, which they can then test. If what they observe doesn't match what they predict, they revise those paradigms over time. Their paradigms and their predictions change, become more accurate, therefore more useful. We also think in predictions. Our mind constructs models or ideas about how the world and uses them to make sense of our world, our decisions, our judgments, and predictions given us by our paradigms. So a paradigm is like the reading I did. It's like a map. A map shows us where things are and how they relate to each other. When we move to a new city, we map our house. A map helps us get around. Likewise, we create paradigms with people, companies, ethnic groups, countries, governments, political parties. We create paradigms of everything, in fact, even of ourselves. Our paradigms are never complete, and they're never identical. Paradigms are not as complex as the reality they represent. They show us only an approximation of the world as we grow. Our paradigms become more and more complete. No two of us have the same paradigms because our experiences are different. Paradigms can be wrong, and this is what gets us in trouble, because our paradigms are not faithful reflections of reality. They are, to some degree, wrong. Our paradigms can therefore limit us. When we act on the basis of wrong paradigms, we limit ourselves. As long as we believe false paradigms, we'll stay within artificial boundaries and we'll lose whatever experiences we might have found outside them. Our paradigms of ourselves come from our social mirror. Some of our most important paradigms are the ones we hold of ourselves. Those paradigms come in part from the idea of this social mirror. The social mirror reflects other people's responses to us, to our thoughts, to our behaviors. But the social mirror can show us a distorted picture because people often criticize and judge more readily than they praise and support. We can end up with one-sided picture of ourselves that emphasize the negative. The major changes in life come from changing paradigms. When we don't achieve what we want, we typically think we must do something different. That's true, no doubt, but it can also be misleading. Often the best way to do something different is to think something different to change our paradigm. And finally, it's great if we can live more from imagination than from memory. Memories are restatements of experiences. They can't show us anything new or move us beyond what we have been. Imagination, in contrast, expands on experience. Imagination gives potential its first-handable and observable form. We imagine what we would be, what it would be like to be, and then this image gives us a target to move forward. As long as we live in memory, we have no target other than to stay where we are. So revisit where we've been. So now I'd like you to take a few minutes and work through the social mirror exercise. There's a worksheet included in this lesson that you're going to work through ideas and look at what the social mirror and its impact on you. So you're going to answer some questions about what beliefs you have about yourself that might be limiting you and how those beliefs have been created or influenced by your social mirror. Now that you identify those beliefs, and if there's at least partially incorrect, what can you do differently to begin to move from memory to imagination? After you do this exercise with the worksheet, come back and listen to part 2.